Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today, one last time, I'm joined by Rachel.
Bye, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
I already had hey, bye scheduled, and then
I ruined it for you. I'm sorry.
I want to see this spreadsheet you have of all your intros that you have planned out.
Check. Use that one.
yeah.
I realize now that I made it sound like it was a one last time for everyone because of the way was ordered.
Yeah.
But no, just Rachel.
Yeah, just me.
This is your final episode.
Moving to Arkansas.
Moving to Arkansas.
How many days before your accent will be fully back?
Oh, like one. I'm already working on it right now.
Yeah, okay.
I'm slowly just getting back to it. So,
yeah, okay. Got to fit in, right? You don't want to be a weirdo.
Really, I've just been fitting in here. This is just going to be the real me coming back out. So, yeah.
Wow.
We should do a show on the road to Arkansas sometime.
On the road again. Yeah, that'd be fun.
We'll just drop in. We'll
I'll show you around.
Spend some time with your family.
Yeah.
I want to go see that mascot. The six-legged.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the pompous cat. Or
Wampus
cat. Sorry.
Pompous cat. Yeah, he's very pompous.
I want to see. So if you're listening and you have a RV that we can drive and take the show on the road, please reach out to us at podcast at cccomaha.org, and we would love to take it on the road for
Rachel's like,
a week.
I thought I was getting rid of you guys. They're coming.
We'll just pull
We'll let
up.
you get settled first.
Yeah.
Speaking of settled, how's it going with packing and moving?
It's going. I feel like moving's always so chaotic. I feel like a lot of people are moving right now. Like this time of the year, there's just always a lot of people who I feel like move and make transitions. But yeah, it's just always busy. And I'm a person who always has a hard time processing things like in the moment unless I'm very like intentional about it. So I think when you're moving, it's just like you're packing, you're hanging out with a bunch of people and trying to like say your goodbyes and do all this stuff and get transitioned over to the next place. And I think about month 2 of being where you're supposed to be, that's when it kind of hits you. I feel like, especially for me, it's just like, oh, okay, I moved. I'm here. And like, sadness or whatever just kind of hits and you're like, oh my gosh.
You can finally process.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that right now it's just kind of crazy and there's a lot going on, but I'm sure in a couple of months it's all gonna hit me a little bit differently. So yeah.
You'll just start the grieving process of missing the podcast the most out of everything you left behind.
That's probably when I'll start my new one.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Maybe you can come on as a guest and promote it.
Yeah. I'll come on and share my new thoughts.
So we should probably, share a couple moments maybe everyone has from your time here. We'll go counter.
80. How many episodes are we in?
80. I think this week is 90 maybe.
Wow.
Oh, man.
That's a lot, Rachel.
I wish I would have made it to 100.
Yeah,
that would have been cool.
Lot.
But
So close. 10 more weeks.
I know, that's crazy because, I started with the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Been here the whole time.
Crazy.
We'll start counterclockwise with Jess.
Okay.
Your favorite Rachel moment.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, I'll preface it. I feel like one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you are fierce. And so everything that you go into you're just very well spoken and you just have a boldness about you. And one of my favorite episodes with you was the one that you and Eric did with the Dufours about sexuality and marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like that was a big ask and like that was really kind of brave for all of us to step out and to do something like that. And just that to me is an example of how you kind of consistently have carried yourself every week of just very balanced, very unafraid to ask the questions or to ask for wisdom on really hard things. And I feel like that's helped a lot of people. So I think for me, it's just overall that. But I was like, in that episode in particular, when you were just like, hey, like this is about sex and marriage. Yeah. I'm like, I see you. And I think you're an amazing person and I am really going to miss you.
Thank you. That's so sweet.
That is so sweet.
We don't even have
All right, Alex, follow that up. Shed a tear.
It's been it's been fun.
It's been real.
Keep it real.
Hasn't been real fun.
Keeping it Christian. No, it has been a fun journey. I mean, I think I was listening actually not on purpose, but because sometimes I'm in my car and then, the next thing plays. So I think I had one of our episodes on it and it started replaying the first episode we ever did.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
Even just you speaking and becoming more and more comfortable. I think what a lot of people don't realize is not just the weight of like preparing for this podcast, but like the weight of sharing things vulnerably with lights on and a microphone. And, it's one of those things that everyone's like, I want a podcast. I want this. It's really cool. It's in vogue. And so it's been fun to see, I think all of us, but I think especially you, come out of your shell more and more, really own like your convictions. I think you're somebody who owns your convictions really well and wants to share it and has a lot of grace for people inside of that. And so it's just been fun to see that transition, that growth. I mean, even from being a resident here at CCC, seeing you come in, invited by a few friends to Omaha, Nebraska, of all places, and your journey there took you a lot of different places. For ministry, we got to hang out for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I was your resident for like 5 seconds.
And then you took the kid's job, and so it's just been. It's hard for me to just narrow it down just to the podcast because it has been fun to see you just grow and blossom over these years. And so super bummed to see you leaving and having your voice, because I think you have really found it. I think Jess, being a part of the podcast has really helped you bring that out.
Definitely.
But now we begin again without you. So we'll miss you. And even your boldness of like, I remember you telling Eric what his word of the year was.
Yes, I still remember.
And that was not planned. And both of you girls just jumped on you like, no, here's your word of the year. And I'm going to tell you why.
Do it.
So
was it trust?
Trust.
What you guys don't see is like after the boldness, like later that day, I'm like thinking in my head, like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Did I say that wrong? Were they thinking I was weird? Oh my God. And like, that's what's going through my head afterwards. But
you and everyone else.
Yes.
I'm just really looking forward to you not making jokes about my mom anymore. That was really hurtful.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
That
was one of my favorite moments, though, because it's weird when you have, a relative that's passed and people maybe they know it, or it's just like, it's a joke, right? To say your mom, it's funny. And then I love that moment so much. It was funny to me.
I think there was 2 on one episode.
It was like moment. 2 weird moments.
You just saw Rachel's soul drop.
When she realized, oh my gosh, I just said that to Eric.
I know.
It was good. It's all good. Anytime that we can be real on here, I've appreciated that too. It's just, I think everybody's said it and I don't need to say it again, but I think even for me, I come at things sometimes pretty passionately, and I think recently it was some of the harder conversations we've had about whether it's COVID or conspiracy theories or some of these things. I remember, you bringing to my attention just like, wow, sometimes I don't even know like if I can disagree with you because you're kind of coming at this in a way that makes me feel really challenging. And that was so good for me to hear even in these conversations, because I do get really passionate, but man, I just hope you know that your voice is valued. And I think you've always done such a good job at being a really level ground for people listening, because I think people are approaching these topics that we discuss from so many different angles and so many past life experiences that we can all learn from. Kind of your trepidation when you come into these topics, and it's been really good, and I think we've all learned from that. So
that's so sweet. Well, I have to share, I feel like being on the podcast has been awesome, but I think before, like the times where we're in our meetings or like before the podcast is like my favorite part, because I feel like all so different and we bring something so different, but like I feel like I've grown so much from each of these relationships, and being on the podcast has been hard, but it's been so growing for me as a person and as a believer, and just like each of you have grown me in different ways that I never would have grown before. And just being able to have these hard conversations, even though they're scary, like God has really used that in my life. And I feel like hopefully he's used that in other people's lives. But it's just been such a blessing to be a part of this and get to know you guys and your hearts. So
yeah.
Well,
we're gonna miss you, but everyone has the rest of this episode to look forward to. So.
And luckily, you gave us a softball. We let you pick on the final episode the topic.
One of my favorite topics.
It's a softball today, so that's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. All right. Well, up next we've got headlines. All right, our first headline comes from GoodMorningAmerica.com. It makes sense that they have a website, but I guess I never really thought of the fact that they have a website. They're a TV show. Anyways, the headline reads, former Bachelor star Colton Underwood comes out as gay. I guess in some ways this, we were just celebrating Rachel earlier and her time here leaving. And we always, whenever we bring up The Bachelor, we have to talk about Mackenzie, who used to be on the podcast, who loved The Bachelor and wanted us to talk about it more, and we never did.
And I feel like we've talked about it way more.
We talk about it all the time.
So if Mackenzie, if you're out there listening, sorry, but this headline goes out to you.
Gosh.
I'm gonna, Alex, you're our resident Bachelor fan. You just know everything about The Bachelor. So if you want to take this one away, I'd love for you to do that.
Just seems like she's.
I feel like I could too. I have watched The Bachelor since the first season.
Oh my goodness.
I have watched them all.
It's a lot of roses.
And I will tell you on this season, because I know there's some Bachelor fans that are watching, so I'm going to say this. There was something off when he picked his perfect match, Cassie, and there was after it just played out so perfect. She was the best match for him on this season, and so then all the fans, including myself, could not figure out
never how it worked,
how it fell apart, and it was like there was secrecy around it, and there were so many times where I would be talking with my friends about it, and it's like there's something off, like there's something missing that we're not hearing. I don't know if this is it. I mean, I feel like that's kind of assuming too much into it, but I'm like, there was always something off about this season for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Dissect it, Alex.
I don't have a lot to dissect here because I haven't watched the full interview yet, but I think it just brings to light just the difficulty, I think, of him wrestling through this. And I think when you have any kind of conversations around, sexuality, human sexuality, I know there's going to be people. He was raised in the church. He was the, the virgin bachelor, that was kind of like his title. And I think I just saw a snippet. I think he mentioned, hey, people wondered why I was the virgin bachelor. Well, this was it. And even, reading some of this article, he said, which is, I think, based on the interview, he said he just remembered praying to God the morning he found out that he was the bachelor, saying, thank you for making me straight. And this would finally lead him to a path of having a wife and having kids and having, this life that he has, been subscribed to. And then he's obviously had feelings, that are another way, and attractions that are towards another gender. And so to me, just having a lot of background in family and knowing people that have struggled with homosexuality, and that's just been a part of them and coming out and that whole process, I just feel for him in that process. I know it's a long journey, and then I know for him even coming out on national television and then answering a lot of those questions that I think people have for him, it's just going to be a difficult road ahead for a lot of people, including women, that were a part of that show, that were pouring themselves out to him and really building these relationships, with him. And they're probably in the recoil of, was any of that real? Was this all fake? And so there's just always so much more wake to these kinds of things, getting outside of like the theological framework of it. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And how Christians respond to Colton here, because I think he was like pegged as like a bachelor hero for, I think, a lot of Christians because of the virginity thing, because of our purity culture stuff, because he refused to, because I mean, let's be honest. If you watch The Bachelor, it's a lot of nastiness and a lot of like just hookups and, just not stuff that I would subscribe, to if I was counseling young men or young women to. I wouldn't suggest anybody to take that path to find love, to be honest. But he was kind of like different. And so I think a lot of church people were like, he's different. He's finally the one. He's finally like our saint. And so then anytime you kind of put too many eggs and faith in the basket of a person, it just is a reminder that, they might fail you. Yeah. So
anyone else have anything to add to The Bachelor? No. Okay. Well, we'll see where that comes from. It has sparked some suspicion that maybe this will lead to the first LGBTQ Bachelor, which would probably be a pretty obvious turn for that to take. Guess we'll wait and see. All right, our next headline comes from VanityFair.com. It says former Hillsong member Justin Bieber calls out pastors who put themselves on this pedestal, quote unquote. In this interview, the pop star explained how organized religion can often transform into just another form of celebrity worship. It is known by some people that Carl Lentz, who we recently spoke about on When Leaders Fail, was a Hillsong pastor. He was Justin Bieber's pastor, who has now been disgraced by his actions and unloyal to his wife. But Justin Bieber, in this article at least, he's kind of calling out how a lot of times churches kind of boister their pastors to celebrity statuses. A little bit of maybe calling the kettle black here. But I totally understand when it comes to church why he would feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I thought that was interesting, especially after his Easter album came out.
Freedom, don't it feel good?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I thought it was an interesting thing to hear from him. And I think it is interesting because he is a celebrity and he's a Christian in people's, in a lot of people's eyes, that he's a Christian celebrity. And so I think he's kind of up on a pedestal in some ways, and a lot of people put him on a pedestal of like, okay, he's saying he's a Christian, so he needs to show it or prove it or not fail. And I think a lot of his songs actually talk about him not being what people want him to be and him failing over and over again and him just being like a human. So I think that was just interesting that he brought that up about pastors. And we also had our podcast that talked about just when pastors fail, and we talk about them being put on a pedestal. And so that's another, kind of connection there too. But yeah.
And I think partly we have to realize too that it's in some ways what we want of a pastor is we want a king, and I think traditionally growing up, even in the church, that was the version of what a pastor looked like. There was a king and his queen, and they didn't specifically say that, but there was definitely, we want an all authoritarian buck stops here type of person that's leading us, that has no flaws, that has the perfect personality and is a super extrovert and can teach God's word really well, but also has time to shepherd people really well. And then we put a lot of pressure on these types of people, on people that are pastors and ministers in this kind of situation. And man, then when they succumb to the pressure, it ruins us. But it's kind of this two-way street of how much am I putting, how much trust and faith. Like, man, if you're putting a lot of trust and faith in me, not that I have some big platform, then I'm gonna fail you at some point in our lives, or I'm gonna say something that is gonna make you not trust me, or things like that. And so I think I have to check my heart, because there's pastors that I'm like, oh, I want to hear their sermon on this, because their view on this is going to be more biblical or more biblically rooted than Jimmy down at the other street. And so it's just part of it's part of the brokenness of humanity and us desiring a king to be kind of the face of a representation of God and priesthood kind of stuff. So,
and you're talking about, I think you said people that are putting pastors on pedestals. So that's a lot of pressure. And then Justin Bieber is talking about pastors that put themselves on pedestals.
Yeah.
And how, I mean, they can also like create this separation from God, you know, to see as like, I'm the savior. And so I think that there's just another dynamic in this very complicated thing in the church where it's like a pastor can be put on a pedestal by us or by themselves. Yeah. And there's so many pressures. And so I think humility is the key through all of it. But
yeah, and I just love that this is just a regular article that he just did. And like one of the things that he talked about was like, man, the reason we shouldn't be doing this is because we can have that same relationship with God that we are thinking that pastors have with God. And so
we have the same access.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that was so cool. I mean, just some of the things he was saying, just the truth that was in that, just in an article about him. And so I thought that was a really cool article for sure.
Yeah. Very good. One final headline. This one comes from the Omaha World Herald, but it is obviously a national story at this point. This headline reads, Minnesota cop will be charged in shooting of black motorist. This is coming from what happened earlier this week, or past weekend, I guess, where a white female cop of 26-year-old veteran pulled over a 20-year-old black man and his girlfriend, and she ended up shooting him once, and he drove off and he bled out and died and crashed his car at that point. This has been, yet another really tragic moment that is another example of police enforcement going wrong. It's really sad to see. I think we've seen a lot of unrest in Minnesota again, and other parts of the country. You wonder if this is, with something like, I think George Floyd's death was not that far from where this happened in Minnesota, and that was not even a year ago.
Trial.
Yeah, and that trial's happening right now. Yeah. So it's just a lot going on. Our country can't seem to grieve one thing without another thing happening. But it's also probably going to take a lot of people standing up and, being vocal about some of these things for change to happen. Where's everyone sitting on this? Have you been following much of it? Anybody have any thoughts? Or is
it makes me sad, very sad. And I feel like, there's just so much unrest just from the other side of it. In this article that we're talking about specifically, it has the gun that she used and a taser. And I have the gun that she used. I've shot like at a range before. And I even just from personal experience, me being empathetic, like it feels like a gun. And I don't understand like how our police, this is a genuine question. If is there not a safety? Is your safety on when it's holstered? Like, to me, it's more than just pulling out and shooting.
Okay, for that specific model, that specific model of gun is a Glock, and the safety for a Glock is in the trigger. So you pull the trigger and it shoots. Off. So there's no real like manual safety with those. So once you pull that with the intent to fire and your finger's on the trigger, it's going to go off.
But just looking at it, it just makes it more realistic to me, and it is a tragedy. I found out about it, and I hadn't read any articles, but Ben sent me he was like watching it on TV, and he sent me the details, and it was just like, why did this happen again? And what's going on? Like, there's obviously something. I think more training needs to happen across the board, but what's happening in Minnesota is one of the things I thought were
right.
And this is already happening, and just watching more of the George Floyd trial this past week, you can watch the live feed of the whole trial, and just watching that has just stirred up a lot in me, and my heart just breaks for these families, no matter what's going on. Like, this isn't the answer. It's tragic.
And I think there's just so many voices in it too with social media. Everyone becomes outspoken, and then everyone has their opinions, obviously, and their takes on this. And in the video, it said that they can, she can be heard audibly saying that I'm going to tase you, and she shouts taser several times at him before shooting him with a handgun. So the defense there is that, well, it was an accident. But I think that's it goes in a lot of directions, and we're not here to just have this debate. But I think it's important too that even if this was a mistake, there's consequences, and obviously you can see now that she is being charged, so there are consequences, and there are policemen and women who are heroes. There are policemen and women who do great things in their community. But like with anyone, we cannot never be critical of people, of leadership, of police. It doesn't matter who it is. We have to look at what they're doing, the actions they take, the pressures they're under, and take all of that into account. We can't just say, oh, well, they're a policeman, so they get a free pass, or, oh, they're a policeman, they're a terrible person. We can't live in those extremes all the time.
Yeah. I think every case is completely different as well, and I think some of the surrounding things around this case are different, whether it was an accident or not, you grabbed the wrong thing or not. I think those are things to be determined, and we'll never know. So I think to project either way that it was done on purpose and that's just the excuse is not really wise, or vice versa. And so I think what a lot of it comes down to is just a knowledge of even police reform, and not even just police reform, but there was, a war on drugs, which I think was a good thing at the time. But this drug war that happened in the 80s, 70s really informed a lot of the laws of our land. Yeah, which informed, how this young man got a warrant, and why they stopped him, and all the things that ended up surrounding that. And you wonder, are there better options? Are there better ways to rehab people, to the charges that we give people? And then you've got, marijuana, which I think is what he ended up getting his first warrant for, and then not showing up to court and things like that, just based on what I read. But that's even nationally in different places around the country. Like, is this legal? And some places are decriminalizing it and all that kind of stuff. And so we have to look at it. It's so complicated, and I think we want to just make these issues like, yes, it's this, yes, it's that, yes, she did it because she's racist, no, they didn't. Yeah. But I think ultimately, hopefully, justice is the thing that we hopefully will prevail. I mean, I think the fact that there was a body camera, this is hopefully a win that will help justice happen in this kind of situation either way. That 5-10 years ago, those were steps to help ensure that we have accountability in these kinds of things, and that accountability will hopefully win out. And so I'm grateful for that, because I think it gives us a more full picture and less assuming what she was saying or screaming or yelling or reading into things. And so I do think there are steps that have been taken that even are giving us a more full view of what's happening here, which I'm grateful for. But obviously, we still have steps in this country, legislation steps, and all that kind of stuff, to continue to go to bring unity and help create liberty, justice, freedom for all. So,
yeah, good stuff. All right, that does it for headlines. Up next, by popular demand, or by Rachel's
Rachel demand.
Yeah, Rachel demand, as she's parting ways with us. We are going to be talking about birth control. Birth control. Thanks, Rachel, for picking this one. I think it is a stigma that is all over the church in a lot of ways, especially with language like babies are gifts from God and things like that. Not to say that
Be
they
fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Not that none of this is not that any of this is not good. It's just that there becomes a certain stigma around any type of interruption or any type of thing that you might choose to do to prevent a child from being born. And is that appropriate?
Or a child from being created.
Yes, created, not from being born. There you go. I like that better. Thanks, Jess. Thankfully, we've got 2 males, 2 females to discuss this. This isn't just going to be a one-sided conversation, which I am thankful for, because that would be terrible in this topic. But yeah, hopefully we can create more space to talk about this in a safe way, and in a way that we can all learn from each other, and people listening can feel that it's not something so taboo to discuss. Let's just jump in. When does the church talk about birth control? Is this something we even hear about much?
Yeah. Oh, and before we get started, I think maybe it's good to note, this is a very sensitive thing to talk about, especially we're just people who have our own experiences and our own, stories, and, we're not doctors, so we are not able to
speak for yourself.
Yeah.
We're not able to Diet Dr. Pepper.
tell people what they should and shouldn't be doing. But I think on this podcast, we just like to talk about things that we don't talk about in the church normally, or things that it's like, man, why do we not talk about this? And so I think for us, the goal is just to have this conversation so that it can maybe help others initiate this conversation or feel more comfortable talking about it. It's not for us to tell people you should be doing this, this, and this, because we're not medical doctors. We're not in your shoes. We're not discerning what God is asking you to do. We're just sharing our own experiences. So I just want to kind of give that little disclaimer before we go into all this topic, so people kind of understand.
Well, that's our call as Christians, and I think that's one of the things that makes me passionate about this podcast is we are called to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And I think a lot of times we forget the mind part, and part of loving God and doing what He's called us to is to listen, to learn, to exercise our mind. And by doing that, I think we're showing God love. It's a way that we love Him. And so I think that's a critical part of this podcast that sometimes maybe if you just jumped on lately or whatever, that we don't always talk about, like what's it, why does this thing exist? And so this is part of why it exists, because maybe we're not going to get up and preach a sermon on this, but these are real topics that people in the church are wading through, that we're wading through half the time as we're processing it. So I do think it's good.
Yeah. I think talking about when does the church talk about birth control, sometimes I think about like the Catholic Church, and like they are very natural family planning is a huge thing with the Catholic Church, and they do classes, and they talk they want people to kind of see this method and learn about it. And so I feel like the Catholic Church talks about it a lot in a sense of kind of directing people in one direction, but really from my own experience in church, that was not even something you talked about. I mean, birth control was don't have sex, like just don't have sex. And so it wasn't really talked about. And then when I got married, it wasn't talked about. And so I think for us, it was just like, well, the church isn't telling us anything. They're not giving us any information or kind of guiding us in this direction. So you just go with what is the, common thing, or what is the world doing, and you're kind of left to go in that direction. And so I think that's been my experience with people talking about birth control in the church. But then after we got married, I have friends who are believers, and we, have really intentional conversations, and that's something that we talked about as friends who are believers. But it wasn't the church, it was just our intentional friendships, and that topic came up. So that's kind of my experience about it within the church. Before we go further, you did mention natural family planning, and I think it would be just important to explain what that is in case somebody's listening and then they're like, I'm not sure what that means. Yeah. So, I mean, that is essentially, it's a natural way to, for birth control. And so women just basically understand their cycle, understand when they're supposed to ovulate, and they understand that, okay, there's a time frame within this period of time that if we, do have sex, we will, most likely get pregnant. So the natural family planning part is you kind of plan around those times just to prevent getting pregnant.
There are even apps where it's like, today you have a 10% chance of getting pregnant. Or today
and it's raining.
Today it's 80%.
Yeah. So there's no it's natural. There's no, other contraceptives that are being used. Sometimes people will use other methods, during that fertile time. But usually it's fully just planning around those time periods. So, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that.
And so you're saying and suggesting, just for like the definition, that you wouldn't use any other types of
No, yeah, like
preventative measures.
Prevention. And I think within the Catholic Church, that's how they do it. But some people have adapted that, and maybe they go a little differently. So then during that fertile time, they might use condoms or some other method to prevent getting pregnant. But yeah, that's kind of the one that I feel like is common in the church too. If it does come up, I feel like that's the one that I hear people kind of talking about is natural family planning. So yeah,
that's good. For me, I obviously didn't have a lot of conversations about it because I wasn't, maybe that's not obvious, but I'm not a gal. And so that wasn't like a part of introduction into my physical body or anything like that. I remember being in high school, hearing about, a girl that would be on birth control and, typically, and there was people that would, well, I'm on birth control for this or that. And I didn't really know. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. So I didn't really have a lot of interactions with it besides hearing that. But when I was in a premarital class here at CCC before getting married, that was the first time it was really introduced as, hey, husbands and wives should talk about this together, So that's one important part of, just family planning. What are your expectations in a marriage and children, all that kind of stuff is obviously something you should have a conversation about. But then as you get into the conversation about two becoming one flesh and all of that, like having those kinds of conversations are something you should do together. So if you're a gal that's already been on birth control, the suggestion was letting your, fiance at the time, your future husband, know what that is, what it does to your body, how you respond, how you react, what types there are. Because to me, just birth control, it's just something I'm like ignorant to. Like I just like, oh, a pill, that was just for a long time what birth control is. But even as you said, just not having sex is also birth control. It's when we take control of a situation in some kind of way of saying we're not going to procreate. And so I think that's part of it. And so that's kind of my church experience, my experience growing up. So
yeah.
Well, just the fact that it's important for both people to take responsibility for this. It shouldn't just fall on the woman to be like, oh, well, you're the woman this is your thing to worry about.
And that's a good point, because when I went before we got married to kind of go talk to my doctor about birth control, I brought my husband with me, and they were like, is it okay that he's in here? Can he be in here? I'm like, yeah, I want him to know everything that goes into birth control and what that's going to do to my body, what that looks like. I want him to be aware of the side effects and everything that's going into that too, because it tends to fall on the woman to take control and kind of be in charge of that aspect of marriage. But the reality is it takes two to make a baby. And so I think it's really important for the spouse to be aware of what's going on and how that's impacting, and my husband really cares about me and cares about, what my body and how healthy I am and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's really important that it doesn't just fall on the woman.
I feel like, so I'm almost 37, and I feel like I grew up during the heart of purity culture. So it was something that wasn't discussed, or I think we've talked about it even in the past, like sex was shameful, or abstinence is how you deal with sex or getting pregnant. And so I grew up like having this, very taboo, and not hearing it talked about in the church. I think the first time I was shocked. I mean, we talk about sex here at Christ Community. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you've heard the podcast or, a sermon here around a part of the Bible that talks about sex, like we don't shy away from that. And I think that even, I've been here almost 9 years. So, a good part of my life, like it was kind of like, is this okay to talk about in the church? Cause I'm not hearing about it, but I have questions and I'm thinking about it and I don't know what God thinks about it. And so, I think that that's really empowered me, but, something for, I guess, with birth control, with being in marriage, it was one of those things where when Ben and I got married, he was like, do I get to have a say? Like, it's your body. And there's lots of different types of birth control, right? Yeah. But if you're taking something, like that affects my body. And like you said, Rachel, like the symptoms or the side effects or what that does, like the female body feels that. And so it was an interesting, like, coming out of like a purity culture and getting married. And then it's like, okay, I'm inviting you into this very intimate part of this process. And so just, it created like even in those moments, like it creates a bond when you choose to communicate with your partner openly about that. It's like, there's nobody else that I'm ever going to be talking to about this like this and making those decisions. And so just the intimacy that creates to trust somebody to say, hey, like I love you enough to invite you into this space that's very personal to me. So
yeah, and it's very important in a marriage. And I feel like the church is good about getting involved in finances with marriages or getting involved in parenting or getting involved in different areas within a marriage because we want people to have healthy marriages. But I think sometimes we shy away from these conversations that are just as important and valuable in a marriage. And sometimes it makes it a little bit harder to have that healthy conversation for a married couple to talk about birth control.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about our personal experiences and we can elaborate on that too, if there are some other experiences that we wanted to share, but also what influences that and, what maybe are there bad experiences that you've had interacting with people and talking about birth control or things that maybe have made you feel like, okay, I'm doing something wrong or anything like that comes to mind?
For me personally, we started and I was using a pill and there was bad side effects with that. I had a lot of really bad anxiety and just emotional issues that I was not myself. I wasn't really myself and I had a lot of headaches and just different side effects like that. But to me, I was like, well, this is our option. Like this is our only options. I just got to push through because like this is what we have to do if we don't want to, have kids right now. And I think talking to my friends, it was really a good conversation because they just shared their own experiences and shared what they were doing, and they were doing natural family planning. And I was kind of telling them about what we were doing, and it was just encouraging because they never forced anything on me and were like, oh, you need to do this, or you're sinning, or you're not doing what God wants you to do. But they were just open with like, yeah, this is actually something we prayed about and asked God for guidance on this. And I was like, oh my goodness, why have I not thought about this aspect of my life being something that I can pray and ask God to give me guidance on? Like I've just been leaving it up to just, what the world has to say about it. And then we did switch over to natural family planning. And for me, that's been a whole personal journey on my own of just learning about my body and learning how God created me in such an incredible way of like, man, I can know how I'm working and that's just such a cool thing to see that God created women in such an incredible way to conceive kids. Like the way that our body works is so that we can bear children and be fruitful, which is really cool. So that's my own personal experience right now. And just like the fact that I didn't have any more symptoms and it was just more of a natural thing and healthier for me personally. That's my experience. But I just love how it wasn't like you need to do this or like I'm doing this, so you need to do this. And this is what God's telling me. So you should probably do the same thing. And so I really try to be that way when I'm talking with other people about it and just be open and have grace and hear their own experiences. Mm-hmm.
I think everybody has different kind of experiences of what they assume children are. I've got people, friends, family members that that their reasoning for, and they'll joke like, oh, hanging out with your kids is like birth control, and like that's enough, for not just my kids in general. Okay. So kids, I'm not throwing you under the bus. Daddy loves you. Just throw that out. But I think a mindset that's going into it is, because I do believe, and Scripture talks about children are a blessing from the Lord. And if we look at children as a burden, and if our mindset is like, I just want to eliminate the burden of a child, inside of my life. And that's why I want to take control of this situation inside of if that's the reason for taking it, I think it's one of those things we need to step back and understand, man, am I just trying to avoid childbearing and things like that inside of marriage? And I think it goes without saying that we're trying to have this context inside of that in some ways, but am I just looking at children as a burden that I want to avoid? And some people have that because of the way they were raised, Right. Some people, man, I've got a lot of siblings that were adopted to the foster care system, and they just had really bad lives. They were handed really bad early childhood experiences, and then the trauma from that because of their parents not making decisions or even caring that much about this, and then having so many kids, not being able to take care of them, and then the responsibility was just outlandish, and then they ended up on drugs or doing other types of things without really praying and considering the ramifications of these blessings that they'd been given. And then they ended up feeling like as if they are a burden on their family, on society, and they don't want to repeat those same mistakes that their mom or dad made. And so their image and thoughts of what it means to have kids is it's a burden. And so all of us have different perspectives that we're coming from as we're processing that. But I do think it's an important thing to ask ourselves, do I just see kids, the potential of kids as a potential just burden on my life, or what are the potentials for blessing inside of that?
Well, and I think you've seen a movement in past years with, I know there's like even a subreddit for child free, where it's just all these adults who discuss why they're never going to have children. Yeah. They may be married, they may not be, but there's a stern commitment to the idea of remaining child free. Yeah. And you see these types of decisions being made, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Alex. There are just so many reasons that people might end up at that place. I remember being a teenager in youth group and having discussions with people about, we don't want to have kids because we just don't want to bring them into this world. It's so scary. And, and the end times are here, that was 20 years ago. But the end times are here, and, we don't want to bring a child into this world. And then I think even you look at 20 years later where we're at now, and people are still like concerned about that because they're like, oh, this world's so messed up. Why would I want to bring a child into this? And they're taking it on as this personal responsibility of, saving them from this.
And especially within marriage, kind of like you were talking about, Alex, like something that was really good in our marriage counseling before we got married is they said, so if you're getting married, you should be ready to have kids. And they just said it to us and we're like, what? No, normally it's like, okay, you get married and then you have like 5 years and then you have kids, and like that's the normal thing, right? You just, can wait. And they were like, no, when you get married, you have sex, right? Yeah. Okay. That's a part of marriage. And kids can come out of that. Like, no matter how much you want to be in control, how much you want to do to control that situation, there are times when you can't control that and it happens. And so I just thought that was such an interesting point of view of like, if you're ready to get married, you think about, are you ready to have kids? As within a Christian marriage where it's like, okay, we're going to be having sex and marriage. And so, but I just think, how are you viewing kids? Is it a blessing or is it a curse? And I definitely, in today's culture, it's a curse for sure. I think people are like, no, I don't have kids. That's a burden. I don't get to do what I want. It's very me focused. So
there are other instances where, we have friends that are choosing to not have kids, are taking steps to physically not have children because they both have like genetic components, they have like a high probability of having a child that is not going to live past birth, or there are different circumstances. And I just feel like as you guys are talking, I'm thinking to myself, these are opportunities for me as a Christian to practice not judging and not jumping to conclusions, because I think there's a lot of, I mean, it's a valid reason if you have like a hard past, or even mental illness that you're afraid that you experience and you're afraid to pass on to somebody. There's validity in that. And I think there's this tendency for, especially in the church, where we're like, well, why don't you want to have kids? Like, you should want to. And we want those people to answer for that, because it's like, oh, you're going to get married and now kids are the next thing and a house is the next thing. And so I think being sensitive, and I mean, because it's an expectation that we can also in this be putting on people. Yeah.
And I think that's why this is such a taboo topic, because there isn't like a black and white answer for everyone. And it's like, you have to pray and ask God, like, what does that look like for me? And we have to be like understanding of everyone in their own situations. So.
Well, and I think there's people who make decisions about having children based on even finances, can we afford to raise this child right now? And it's not, and to your point earlier about if you're getting married, you should be prepared to have kids. Like, well, sure, there are instances where that could happen, but I mean, I know from my own personal experience, we waited almost 10 years of our marriage before we even had a child. And I even remember my mom saying to me at one point, well, we just thought maybe you were, one of those couples who were never going to have kids. She was very sweet about it, but it was still just this thing of, everyone's in a different place and they have different reasons behind it. And it, but I think sometimes we get a little bit superstitious in the way we're like, oh, you're preventing God's will from happening in your life. And it's like, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm taking personal responsibility for my current situation, which I think is applying wisdom to where I am in life and what works for me. Maybe that'll change. Maybe there will be something. Maybe something will happen that is beyond my control. But still, I don't think we should look down on people for taking responsibility for their actions.
Absolutely. I look at this topic and I think, God gives us things to steward in our lives. And this is one of those things that He's given us sexuality. He's given us lots of different blessings. He gives us money to steward. He gives us, I mean, you name it, fill in the blank. But to me, this is one of those things where He's given us, the ability to recreate and to have children, if that's what we want. And it's one of those things where, God, how are you leading me to steward this gift that you've given me? And so that's still something that maybe that sounds like crazy, but it's a space where I'm still navigating of like, I'm stewarding this. And I think like when I look at it that way, I can invite God into that and I can have more honest conversations. Cause I think it's difficult for me. Birth control in itself is something that I have taken for other reasons other than preventing sex. And I've had friends that have too. And so for me, like, hearing, oh, someone's on birth control. I don't know if this is the way for everybody now, but if I hear that, I'm like, I don't even think, oh, you're having sex anymore.
Right.
I know
it's just so common.
My personal experiences with my wife when we were dating and she was in high school at the time, her dermatologist prescribed birth control for her acne, which, acne is a big thing in that age. But my own selfish thing as this, preacher's kid reputation to uphold is, what if people hear that the girl I'm dating is on birth control, and like how selfish of me to just act like, oh, this is all about me now. And what is the perception going to be? And what are people going to think? And, and it's just one of those things where that misconception is so easy for us to allow that to creep in. Even in that situation, I was being incredibly selfish because I wasn't thinking about how this was going to boost her confidence, how she's going to feel better because of this. No, it's just about me and what's the perception. And really that perception doesn't matter.
I like what you said, Jess, about like and I think this is where it becomes taboo or difficult, is inviting the Lord into this decision, in whatever form of birth control something might be, and asking God, I think obviously as a gal about that, and whatever that situation is, if it's acne or whatever that prescription is and for why you need to do it. But I think inviting the Lord into, because we all have plans for our lives, that we think the way they should go. Maybe it is to enter, hey, I never really want to have kids because of the trauma that's happened in my life, or whatever it might be, because I really want this career. And if I get this career, me not having a kid, but I'm a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, I'm going to be saving thousands of kids and bringing, but I think we can go often, and I can go often down the course of my life that I have planned out for myself without asking the Lord what he has to say about it. And yeah, he's given me wisdom and he's given me knowledge and all those kinds of things. But a lot of times, I forget that he's the author of my life, and he's the one that does have control, and he wants to be invited to speak into my life in every single area. There's not an area of my life that he doesn't want to have control and reign over. And so I think often that's the most difficult part, because we have to admit that we're not in control, or we're inviting God to be in control and maybe give us an answer that's different than what we have planned out. And then with that comes disappointment and grieving and all that kind of stuff that goes along in a process. Like I for Aaron and I, we never really talked about how many kids we want to have. We both knew we wanted to have kids, but for us, and even we thought, and we didn't take any measures at the time to be done, but we thought after having 3 kids, that's what, this feels right, and we're like, hey, we're at a point where our third is 2 years old, they're going to be 2, and we're done with potty training. And then you start to see no more diapers and no more, breastfeeding and no more bottles. And then you're kind of like, all right, I think this is good. And so we started to make plans of like, okay, I think this is where the Lord's, led us. And I think we're okay. I think we're done. I think this is good. And then, we were surprised, to find out that we were pregnant. And even in that, so we were like, oh, our kid's a blessing. This isn't what we were expecting. We weren't trying at the time, anything like that. And then you're faced with, okay, God's got different plans inside of this. And then we were shocked in that. And we're like, oh, there's supposed to be twins in that process. And then we're like, holy cow, we were like, we're done at 3. And then all of a sudden we got 5. And then all of a sudden, she goes to an appointment, and then there's one heartbeat that's not there anymore. So then you're in this whole nother set of like, okay, we're like, okay, we're ready. We're preparing our hearts for it. And then you're into a grief section because you're grieving that your plans were failed. And then so it becomes this whole entire thing. And then, for us, Hannah has had some health issues. And so at this point, looking back, if we weren't postured that God gave us Hannah as a blessing in our lives, and if we didn't bring that before God and our hearts were not postured in a correct way, very easily could we have written her off as a burden. Very easily could we have written off her health concerns, these things as a burden, but our posture of her being a blessing has changed our family's lives for the better. It's difficult. There's a lot of hard moments, and there will be more ahead, but I can't imagine, having gotten the script that we planned out being the one that's in our lives. So
yeah, that's really good. And so much of, it's right there in the name, birth control. And I think you hit that on the head, Alex, that it's really difficult for us as human beings and in our nature to not be in control. And so that it takes a lot of humbleness and humility to move past that. Let's talk a little bit about parents' responsibility around birth control. I know that as a resource that some people can look back to, we had the Dufours on, and for a conversation about sex, and
2 amazing conversations.
2 episodes, right? Yeah. And so that's something you can look
Absolutely.
back on.
There's one on marriage, and then talking to your kids about sex too.
And the DeFores, I think they even called themselves a sexpert, so they're experts on this.
Or did we give them that name?
I don't remember. I know
Either
the
way,
word came up.
They are.
But they're experts. They talk about this all the time. So if you're not aware of who these people are, she's written a book called Hooray for the Vajayjay. Just a fun title to say. So
fun title to say.
What was it?
Hooray for the Vajayjay. Right? Isn't that the
that's
name?
it.
Yeah. So
it's on Amazon.
Yeah, I think especially we were talking about when I was in high school, there were so many people in high school that I knew that were on birth control. Like they were just on it for different things, for acne, for, bad, periods, all that kind of stuff. And so to me, I was like, oh, that's just like a normal common thing. And but when you're in high school, you have to have, a parent kind of guide you through that process or go through that with you. And I think it's easy for it might be easy for parents to just be like, well, we don't really need to touch that topic because, that's long down the road. That's when they get married or that's kind of far off and we don't really need to talk about that. But I mean, if you have kids in high school that are going on birth control, I think it's a very important thing for you to kind of talk to them about and what it means and what it looks like. And especially for me, when you're growing up in the church and it's not being talked about in the church, it's helpful if it's being talked about in your family. That's another resource that you have. And I know, we were doing the pill in the beginning of our marriage. And then I found out that my parents had been doing natural family planning their whole life. And I had no idea. And my mom knew all the things about it. She, knew all the steps and everything. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I wish I would have known that. Like, I wish you would have shared that wisdom with me or all those things because that would have influenced me a lot because I really value, their opinions and I think that they're very wise in what they're doing. So I feel like it probably seems like a weird topic to talk about with your kids, but I do think it's very valuable to bring that up.
I think those long-term side effects too that can happen inside of it is a lot of parents might not even know. I've got family members that have because of acne or other, decisions began taking birth control with a lot of caution. They made those decisions on their own and then didn't really fully understand because you're looking to correct an immediate thing and you correct the immediate problems, but then you're not thinking about, okay, when I'm 23 and I want to start having kids, the ramifications and some, birth controls of the possibility for that to happen later. And so even just, again, praying and weighing all of those costs involved, because a lot of times that's just an American culture thing. We want the quick fix. Right. And in high school, like all I could think about, I had so much tunnel vision, like for me at least, like I'm not thinking of 25. Don't ask me my 5-year plan. Like, man, I'm just trying to get a cute girl to go to prom with me, and whatever that's going to take, whatever creams I need to buy for my acne, whatever, that was my...
Did you try taking the pill?
I did not. I did not try that. Proactive was the big thing back then, So I just think that both parents and a kid should be able to like process that and it's just so difficult, I think, at that time and that stage of your life to even talk to a kid.
In reference to the DeFores, I think they do a great job, especially on the parenting episode, of just trying to destigmatize it. And I think that because of the purity culture that we are all somewhat victim to, there is this fear that if we talk about sex, we're letting them know about it. And then that's just going to lead to them having sex. And I think that's a really dangerous path to take. I mean, as a parent, I've had those feelings too, where it's like, it's just better to just keep them in a bubble because then they're not going to know anything. But there is a world out there. They're going to find this stuff. They're going to learn about it on their own without you, and they're going to probably learn it in an inadequate way, in a potentially harmful way. So it's better to take it by the reins earlier on and have these conversations.
I think. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I feel like normalizing it is, and just talking about it and working on yourself and being maybe more comfortable with it. It's not like we all have to go, say the 2 words.
Yeah.
But
I just you talk about normalizing it, and I think it's just one of those things where
it's hard.
It is, but also think about when we don't talk about sex, right? Don't talk about it. We're Christians. We got to be quiet about it. Don't say anything. But then the moment someone's pregnant, we're all like, "Yay! Hooray! Hooray!" And we're talking about the baby, but
We are not talking about
do you know
things
how
that happened to get there.
How this baby was made, and it's like,
Maybe
yes,
you should start saying that.
Well, I'm just saying
Do you guys know?
well, we all know it,
Yeah.
like, right? We're all thinking, okay, they had to have sex for this baby to be here.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we're afraid ever to actually talk about it, but we can rally around the baby.
I think that goes so much deeper than our birth control conversation of just like the deep shame that goes around sexuality that has been perpetrated in our culture. And so now we're swinging way to the other side where we're hearing everything and we're seeing everything and there's lots more exposure. And it's like, where do we go? Where do we land? And so that's where it's like, the hard thing is working on yourself and saying like, it's not comfortable for me to like talk about these things around my kids. But in reality, a 15-year-old can go into their doctor's office in the state of Nebraska without their parents' knowledge and get a prescription for birth control. And so, I mean, knowing that and just knowing like how the physical body, what is it?
Hormones?
Yeah, hormones, all of that development is starting so much earlier nowadays. It's adolescence. Something like that. Yeah. But all of that is starting so much earlier. It's like we need to be engaging in what's that part of our responsibility. The other thing that is interesting to me about birth control is that in a woman's body, like Rachel and I, like, okay, birth control affects us, right? It affects, like if we're taking a pill or we're making a decision, it's us. But, a lot of times for a teenager, it's like your mom is there and your doctor's there. And then you get a little older and you go to college, and then it's your mom doesn't have to go with you anymore. And then there's a doctor and you, and if you're sexually active, maybe your partner or your friends are talking about it because you maybe don't know. And then it changes, and there's always somebody involved in our personal body space and gets a say. And so I understand there's that part of it too, where it's like, for me, I feel like, I've kind of had to change, like, okay, who gets to have a say, or who am I inviting into it? Right. And it's just, it's such an intimate thing.
Yeah. And throughout that whole process, you never had the responsibility of the decision. I mean, you did, but your mom kind of was more responsible. And then when you got a little older, it was kind of like, well, the doctor knows what's right. So they're kind of just,
or you need it for this reason.
Yes. And especially sometimes it's just such a normal thing and a common thing that doctors are just like, it's almost like passing out candy. Like, it's just like, oh, you can have birth control. Like, if that's what you want, you can have it. And I think also to Alex's point, there are so many side effects. And essentially with some, birth control pills, you are stopping your cycle. You are stopping a part of your body that is made to work every month. You're just stopping it from happening. And that includes your hormones. That includes so many other things that is working together with your body. And so it's kind of like, like, I didn't even know that. Like, I just thought I was stopping, like, from having babies. Like, that's a lot of people, that's the only thing they know about birth control. And so I think it is important that, we should be using our minds and understanding what are the things that we're putting in our body, or what are things we're doing to our body, and is this the healthiest thing for us to do? Is it the best thing for us to do? And for some people it is, and that is great. But just raising more awareness for people to dive a little deeper into the things that you're doing and pray about the things that you're doing, instead of just kind of going along with the flow of what everyone else is doing. But I think what you're saying too about the life stages is like, when was it ever my responsibility, or when did I ever actually take charge of that and be like, oh, I need to make this decision for myself?
I think there does become moral conversation that comes up inside of this as well, that we can't, that's unavoidable. And I think a lot of people might have when it comes to types of birth control, because I think there are birth control methods that help prevent conception. So whether that's natural family planning, condoms, or there's birth control, even pills that you can take that, do different things with. There's
the biblical methods.
With fluids. There's, not having sex, that's a part of that.
Yeah. Old Testament biblical, sorry.
Yeah. There's people that they would just, take a knife and get rid of things. But there's those, and then there are, some that are designed for after conception, and that are abortifacients and things like that not maybe everybody knows are part of that. And I think inside of that, there does become a pretty big moral conversation to be had of things like, hey, this is my body, and the choices that I'm making are for me. And then scientifically, the definition of when life happens is at conception. And so if one of you were pregnant and that was known, and I got convicted of killing you, then I'd be facing two counts of manslaughter, murder, things like that, not to go super morbid there. But so I think there is a moral conversation and a responsibility to figure out what those do. And like you were saying, having your husband as a part of that decision, or having people asking those types of questions, I do think are a responsibility for a Christian, someone that wants to ascribe to what God has and the sanctity of life and things like that. Those are responsible questions to be asking about those types of things, because it goes from taking just your life and your decisions into someone's hand, which you're responsible for, to the potential for another life that doesn't get a say in that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And that was one of the conversations that we had around which type of birth control pill you take, because some pills, it is just, you still can have, conception happen, but then the pill is causing your body to not be able to care for that, baby, like normal. So it just kind of naturally just aborts it. And so there were certain things that we were like, oh, I didn't even know. You just don't know. There's just, you're just not really aware of what all goes into that, and how it can go into a moral, am I actually okay with that? Is that something that I believe is okay? And I think just bringing up the conversation in general is just helpful for people to start thinking through it a little bit more, instead of just kind of like, yeah, I'm just taking the pill. That's just what everybody does, and that's what I'm going to do. So yeah, that's really good.
I think I jumped ahead. Sorry, Eric.
No, you're fine. Well, we talked a little bit. I brought up the Bible, which I was referring to. I can't believe it. I'm sorry. When I was saying the biblical version, I was talking about the seed in the earth
Spilling
type thing,
spilling
your seed in the earth, not cutting anything off. That's why I was kind of horrified when you said that at first. I was like, that's not like a birth control option. I think most would
for
take.
Somebody it was.
It was definitely Egyptian culture and biblical culture with eunuchs and things like that.
Yeah.
And so
you're in that Leviticus brain set right now.
Well, it's past Leviticus, but
Okay. Anyways, what does the Bible say about birth control other than the references to spilling your seed on the earth and different things like that? Is there anything that we can practically take from Scripture to apply to our lives today?
Good question.
Pastor Alex.
I think there's people that take this to two extremes when it comes to biblical conversations around birth control. I think one extreme is people that are saying sex is only for birth. Sex is only for the multiplication of a species, that sex should be relegated, and you should only have sex if you are ready to have a baby, and that's the end game. Not necessarily for enjoyment, but I think biblically you find in Proverbs, you find in Song of Solomon, that sex is something designed for unity between two different people. It's something that's designed for enjoyment and pleasure between two different people, that there's this mystery that is happening inside of sex that's spiritual, and the DeForest talked even about that. And so there's some people that would say, no, you should not have sex for pleasure at all and only for procreation purposes. And that would eliminate, so anybody not having sex for procreation purposes is not fulfilling God's will or living a biblical life. And I think that's a bit wild. But then people that take it to the other extreme that get themselves in trouble is really, that take be fruitful and multiply. Like we find some biblical heroes that did this, that were using that kind of scripture to basically the commands around that were God was trying to propagate a nation, and there was people that tried to take that in their own hands outside of marriage. So we've got Abraham, right, who God's like, hey, you're going to have a kid, and God made him this promise that you are going to be the start to this nation, and look at those stars up in the sky. You're going to have more kids than that. And then he's like, bro, Sarah's not getting it done. Mm-hmm. She's super young. I mean, super old. We tried. It's not working. So then what's he do? He tries to make that happen on his own, and he takes in another woman and does have kids with other women. And God's like, no, dude, that's not the plan that I had for you. So there's a faith component in that. We see multiple people inside of Scripture take multiple wives so that they can have offspring, so they can populate this place. And with population becomes dominance and riches and all of these types of things that really are about our own security and not trusting God. And so there's people, even biblical heroes, that take that to the extreme of my job is to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. And that leads to destruction when you're doing it outside of God's plans. And so I think therein lies two of those extremes. And then we find ourselves trying to live in the middle of personal responsibility, some of the things that we've talked about, stewardship of our lives, of our bodies, of all that kind of stuff. And I think there are definitely methods of birth control that the Bible would say, like, don't have babies before you get married, which is that's birth control. Don't have sex outside of marriage, and this won't be a problem. You won't have to worry about controlling those types of things. So I think that's definitely a pretty fast and dry biblical, if that's what we're exposing to, the Bible way of having birth control. But I think there's a lot of others that and I think God's so kind to not give us a prescription for everything, because then we can actually have a relationship with Him and invite Him as a living God to speak into our lives and our situations. And I think that's one of the really cool things. And sometimes we'd rather not actually have a relationship with God. We'd just rather go to the Bible and have a black and white answer and surpass having that kind of relationship, with Him. And I think that's to our detriment in some ways to hope for that, to long for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a full biblical example, but I think those are two different things. Yeah. But I think being transformed, like, if we're just not wanting to have kids because that's what culture says, or, you need to have a career before you have kids, or if you're just saying, I don't want to have kids at this next stop in my life because that's what culture says success is and that's the model I should follow, that's not a right reason. Like we're in Romans told, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of our minds. And so again, inviting God into that process and not just doing it because everybody else is doing it. And so I think that's a very key thing, is inviting the Lord to speak into that and giving Him some control back over our lives.
So do we think there are any methods or ways for the church to get involved when guiding someone through a certain type of birth control, or does the church have a voice in that? Should it have a voice in that?
I mean, I think we've shared quite a few different methods of birth control throughout this conversation. And I think I'm kind of relating it back to like the money thing. Like the church talks about money with people because, maybe the one main concept is, okay, we don't want to be in debt. Like debt, you don't want to be in debt because God's called you not to do that, because then you're not free. You're a slave to something else other than, following God. But then you go home and you and your family or yourself, you think through and pray through, okay, what does that look like for me? How am I going to get to that point? Or how am I going to, what's the best method for me to get out of debt or stay out of debt or whatever? And I feel like the church maybe doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how to do it, but it gives you kind of a goal or an idea. And I kind of think of that in the same way with this, of like, man, there's some really good concepts that the Bible shares with people and want people to follow, but we aren't going to give you a prescription or an exact method of this is what everyone should be doing, this exact method. And so I think it goes back to just what we've been talking about. We should be encouraging the people in our church to be praying about it and asking God to come into that part of our lives rather than just kind of keeping that separate on the side of, we're just going to make our own decision, not really bring this before God or, pray about it or whatever.
I think what's our responsibility is to not shy away from it. That was the first thing I thought was, and I feel like Mark does a great job of this. I feel like I'm proud of us for how bold we've been with this episode and past episodes, because I don't want to shy away from things that God cares about, that people are thinking about, and then that they're not feeling safe or a place to share that in. And I think, like Alex, you just shared, and I mean, and we've shared earlier in this episode of just the different ways that God speaks into our sexuality and different ways that we can see how creation has happened in the Bible. And so I think not shying away from those things, but also being conscientious of not putting shame onto somebody for asking those questions. And so maybe it's like you're in a group or you're in a circle in your community where this isn't a topic that's shared. It's like, maybe, coming right out and saying like, well, what do you do for birth control isn't the right thing, but maybe asking a question of like, hey, how do you think that sexuality has changed since you were in high school? Or like, like starting with basic things where it's like, we're more comfortable with that and we're not putting shame onto a bigger topic. And I think the other thing I'm thinking is, I experience God's love, like you're saying, Alex, like there's control, like we let God have control and reign in our lives. That's also inviting him in to do that. But it's also a way for us to experience God's love and his grace, and for us to experience him in a different way, through our kids. But in the same way, someone that chooses not to have kids, or maybe you're not able to have kids, God can show you his grace, his love, his control through your neighbor or through a stranger or through your family. And so I just think like in all of this, like we're not that important. And it's a big topic that, God is I think leading each of us in obviously different ways because we're all different, but I think it's something that we're still growing in. And so for us to sit here and say like, this is it, or for the church to say, this is it, that scares me. But I think we need to be willing to talk about it, and we need to be willing to grow together in it.
Right. And so. I think this applies to literally every single topic that we've brought up on this podcast of like, the reason these conversations are uncomfortable is because of how people approach the conversation. And every single topic is because people approach the conversation of, I'm right, you're wrong. This is my side, you're on the other side, and we're going to fight it out. And who's going to be proven wrong, and who's going to be shamed, and who's going to feel bad about their position. And that's why these conversations are uncomfortable. But the church needs to be the people who comes to these conversations of, you know what, I'm going to be humble, I'm going to listen, I'm going to be compassionate on what you're going through, and let's pray about this together and ask God. And I think that just applies to all of these conversations, and I feel like the church needs to do that with everything. And so this is a topic we can talk about, but we have to be humble and listen and be ready to help people just follow God.
Yeah. And I think we just being bridge builders. I mean, that's part of our job as Christians. And this is a difficult topic if you're somebody that, infertility, and we've had a conversation about that. And, I've heard from people that are struggling, have struggled with that topic, that have said hurtful things because it's hurtful to them, to those who are able to, and they're like, man, if you're selfish, because I would give anything to, and that's true. Like that person can really truly feel that. And so because of that and the lack of empathy and ability to have that kind of conversation between that person and maybe somebody who is, we just paint each other with these broad strokes and don't hear one another's stories. And I think that's dangerous as well, because then we do feel for people that are in that kind of situation that, man, they would give anything, and to carry their own baby or to give birth and to experience that whole process, as painful and hormonal and all of that it is. And so I think giving one another grace is always a part of it. And when you have a conversation, we always don't want to be offensive to others. And so that's difficult when you're like, well, yes, no, how do we have these conversations without being offensive and just writing off somebody else and their story completely? And I think a lot of times we just want those hard lines in the sand that does write somebody off. But I think Jesus, what was cool about him is he didn't shy away from truth, but he had compassion for people. He met them where they were at. Mm-hmm. He knew everything about them. And then even knowing everything about them, they didn't feel shame. They felt loved and known and accepted. And then they had the ability to go and make changes in their lives.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's all good. And we just can't oversimplify things too. I think that's a big part of it. It's, maybe it comes down to, well, I don't like fish. Well, you like fish and I don't understand that. And now I'm mad and, we're going to fight about something silly, and I think a lot of times it all comes down to personal experience, what people have experience with that forms their opinion. And then it makes it hard for us to be empathetic of someone who has a very different opinion and a different experience. So this applies, like you said, Rachel, to every aspect of our life. But patience and grace, we can give that out abundantly. We shouldn't have a problem with that.
I think just quickly, another thing is if you're impassioned about something, and we all have things that God's wired us to be impassioned about, if it's, you don't think birth control is something that should happen. There's places in the world where women don't even have the choice of if this guy is, where it's like I explained earlier, where a guy is going to just create a village and he's going to have sex with tons of women so he can create a name for himself and create an identity for himself and create power and create all of that. And these women don't even have a choice inside of that. And so there's people that have gone into those places and tried to help with birth control and give these women freedom and a choice. So maybe if you're really, really impassioned about this and you think nobody should ever, what are you doing to bring hope and life and light to those people, to educate the people who have no other option, inside of their lives? And so I think we always have to remember that when we're impassioned about it, not just to be angry, but to turn that passion into something that God can use to bring redemption, not just to bring hate or to just cut somebody off. So
these things can bring us together, pull us apart. Let's all get together on agreeing that we can disagree sometimes, right? That's where we'll land this. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for being a part of this conversation, Rachel. Thanks for putting the effort into getting some of these ideas together. And we're gonna miss you. And I want to play Bone Thugs in Harmony right now. See you at the crossroads, but I don't know what they're singing. I don't approve of this. This is I'll just have a conversation with you, Rachel, I guess, because this is awkward and weird.
CCCOmaha.org.
If you have any questions and concerns, or if you'd like to ask us to shut up Jess and Alex from singing duets on the podcast, send those to us on social media over at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. But until then, we'll talk to you next time.